Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning report for Tuesday, the 3rd of March, 2026. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right inside the Beltway. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said yesterday that the Trump administration is going to roll out a program to mitigate energy costs due to the conflict with Iran. He said the implementation of this new program is going to begin today and added that he's already talked to Energy Secretary Chris Wright and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about the program. I still have not seen what this program will look like. I've not seen any official releases yet, but the behind the scenes, a person who's familiar with the planning of this said that it is not going to include a release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Over at the Treasury Department, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the department is already terminating the use of Claude AI in all Anthropic products from the Treasury Department. This is following last week's order from President Donald Trump to remove all Anthropic products from federal agencies, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's announcement that the Pentagon is going to label the company supply chain risk. There has been a lot of back and forth in the media over this, and I've seen that Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei is framing this as the company attempting to safeguard Americans from mass surveillance and autonomous weapon systems. But based on what I have seen, I think the central conflict here is actually over Anthropic attempting to unduly influence defense policy. And this dispute appears to have really kicked off in early January because after the Maduro raid, there was a discussion between a Palantir executive and an Anthropic executive, and that Palantir executive went to the DoD with concerns over that conversation because they believed that Anthropic had disapproved the U.S. using Claude in the Maduro raid. So I think in this situation, the Trump administration is actually concerned over a defense contractor, trying to influence the implementation of defense policy. And basically what Dario Amodei wants, my impression, is that if, for example, there's an AI weapon system or defense system where a nuclear ICBM is headed toward the United States, and we have a missile defense system that uses Claude AI, they want Pete Hegseth to call Dario Amodei and get permission to press the button. And I think this is basically not tenable for a government and a defense contractor. And the Trump administration sees it that way, from what I can tell. And that seems to be the central conflict here, rather than effective altruism AI, figures in Silicon Valley trying to protect Americans. It's more about having an impact, allowing their ideology to have an influence over defense policy. Over in the immigration courts, the Board of Immigration Appeals in late February overturned immigration court precedent that broadly waived fraud committed by aliens during immigration cases after they were admitted to the United States. These two cases, matter of Fort Joe and matter of Gin, the Board of Immigration Appeals ruled that foreigners attempting to adjust their immigration status can be denied for fraud committed after their initial entry into the U.S., and that foreigners found to have engaged in marriage fraud are ineligible for any future green card petitions. This is important because since 2015, the immigration courts have basically treated marriage fraud and other types of fraud committed after a foreigner enters the U.S. as immaterial to immigration cases, because the way they treated it was that adjusting your immigration status from a visa to a green card, or from one green card to the other, they treat it as a new admission to the United States. So basically wipe the slate clean. And a Government Accountability Office report from 2016 estimated that almost 50% of immigration benefit fraud investigations involve potential sham green card marriages. And these two decisions appear to be the Trump administration setting up to crack down on a huge amount of potential fraud in the immigration system. There are no House hearings today, but the Senate has two hearings. One in the Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled to start 5 minutes ago in the Oversight Committee, or the Senate Judiciary Committee. They're having an oversight hearing of the Department of Homeland Security And at 9:30 Eastern, the Senate Armed Services Committee is scheduled to hold a hearing to receive an update on the National Defense Strategy. Moving over to the domestic side, Navy Intelligence Director and Office of Naval Intelligence Commander Rear Admiral Mike Brooks said that China's new nuclear submarines would be able to launch strikes targeting large portions of the U.S. from protected waters. And he said this would fundamentally enhance China's strategic deterrence capability. He said these new Chinese nuclear submarines are expected to enter service in the late 2020s through 2030s. And this is likely part of the picture behind the scenes in the Trump administration. It's increasing the sense of urgency for the Trump administration to check China. And this is part of this larger grand strategic picture of Fortress North America and the pivot to Asia, of which Iran and Venezuela are part of this larger grand strategic picture, because the Trump administration, as we talked about yesterday, grand strategy is about connecting yourself to as many power nodes as possible. And that implies the inverse, that countering an adversary's grand strategy is disconnecting them from as many power nodes as possible. And it appears the Trump administration is doing that. And this might explain why there's this sense of urgency in the Trump administration to pivot to Asia, that China is attempting to build a strategic deterrence system effectively, that there are a new capabilities that would allow them to theoretically deter the United States. Democrat officials from blue states and cities are attempting to replicate Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry's playbook in response to Operation Metro Surge, and how, according to state officials behind the scenes, how they talked and handled President Donald Trump. Minneapolis city officials said that local officials from San Francisco and Portland have already reached out to Fry and his staff for advice on dealing with these federal immigration surges. And this is after Fry met with New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani last month to share intelligence on Operation Metro Surge and Minnesota officials' actions. We've already seen that Democrats and the blue state coalition has been coordinating legal strategy across state lines. We've also seen that the anti-ICE organized resistance has been coordinating and spreading their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and their strategies and methods for building rapid response infrastructure. And now we are seeing Democrats attempting to do the same thing, spread their lessons learned on Operation Metro Surge, not to necessarily oppose federal surges openly, but to effectively politically counter these future surge operations. Because according to some of the staff of Walz and Fry's office, what they did was they lobbied businesses in Minnesota and Republicans in Minnesota to pressure the Trump administration to back down on Operation Metro Surge. And that seems to be the playbook they're trying to spread. Now, the Trump administration is also trying to spread its own playbook, basically what Homan implemented in Operation Metro Surge. That is, for getting local officials, basically forcing them politically to cooperate with federal law enforcement, with federal immigration operations. So that seems to be the model going forward. As we've said previously, a move away from these large named surge operations, especially ones as large as Operation Metro Surge, where in January we saw 3,000 federal agents go into Minneapolis, and one that will allow them to have a more persistent presence, operational footprint across the United States with the assistance of local law enforcement and local prisons. Hacktivist group calling itself Department of Peace claimed that it hacked the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Industry Partnership and publicly released ICE contract data. And this was published by a transparency collective called DDO Secrets, or Distributed Denial of Secrets, who published this contract data on their website. And this involves more than 6,000 companies, including Anduril, Palantir, Microsoft, and L3 Harris. Over in Alabama, the Department of Justice announced a federal grand jury returned an indictment against 34-year-old Cesar Acosta of Birmingham, Alabama, for impeding a federal officer. And the DOJ said that Acosta interfered with an ICE officer who was attempting to arrest an illegal alien in Blount County, Alabama, on the 16th of February. These rapid response groups, as we've said before, are not just in blue states. So last December, we reported on the spread of these rapid response and anti-ICE organized resistance groups into red states. One of those was in Birmingham, Alabama. It was called BAM Migrant Watch, or BHAM Migrant Watch. So this is something that is not just happening in blue states. They have been spreading their methods and strategies for building up their rapid response infrastructure into red states in anticipation of federal surges, or just to resist the normal footprint of ICE enforcement. And here we see that now they are also likely conducting de-arrest attempts in these red states. Over in Minnesota, Hennepin County, Minnesota prosecutor Mary Moriarty said that her office is investigating potentially unlawful behavior by federal agents during Operation Metro Surge. And she said her office is going to pursue charges against federal agents where appropriate and collaborate with local law enforcement wherever and whenever needed. It's likely going to be difficult for her to prosecute federal agents because there are a lot of protections, but they are that Moriarty and other blue state officials, prosecutors, district attorneys, attorneys general, have been building these public reporting databases. And I think in anticipation of a more friendly administration taking office in 2029, basically allowing them to prosecute these ICE agents and Customs and Border Protection officers when a Democrat is in the White House. So I don't expect any high-profile prosecutions at the state level to happen, at least not without significant resistance from the federal level, likely trying to move these cases over to federal courts where they'll likely be dismissed. But I think they are preparing for a longer-term strategy here to begin prosecutions if a Democrat takes the White House and they have a much more friendly legal environment. Over in the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court issued an order yesterday blocking New York Democrats from redistricting New York's Republican-held 11th congressional district. This is the only congressional district in New York City that has a Republican representative. The liberal justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Brown dissented and said this order is, quote, an about-face that ignores federal court limits on state election laws ahead of elections. But the one written opinion from the majority, from Justice Alito, said that the attempted redistricting was an illegal racial gerrymander. I think this is important because this is an indicator of where the Supreme Court could be leaning, and that is towards striking down the Voting Rights Act Section 2. This decision the ruling on that case is still imminent. The last oral argument was last year. The second oral argument was last year, and there's a lot of anticipation around this ruling because it could allow almost 20 new seats for the Republican Party, depending on the timing of the release of the ruling. And there are still states anticipating this. A couple of states have already moved their primary elections back in anticipation of this ruling that would allow a much more sweeping mid-decade redistricting by red states, including Florida. We are, I think, scheduled still to have a special session of our state legislature in April. So I'm still waiting to see when this ruling is released because it does have the potential to net Republicans up to 19 seats. Rep. Ryan Zinke from Montana said he's not going to run for re-election this year. He is the 32nd Republican to announce that they're going to retire or leave Congress in the current session. And he is in a seat that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has identified in a list of 44 Republican-held districts they're going to target in this year's election. And I have seen there are a lot of retirements happening in both the Republican and Democrat Party, but the GOP is facing a lot of empty seats in 2026, which could potentially open those seats up to a flip because they will have no incumbency advantage. And then finally, the Federal Circuit Appeals Court denied the Trump administration's request to delay hearings on tariff refunds, and they have reopened legal proceedings to send that case back to the U.S. Court of International Trade. The Trump administration did initially request a 4-month pause on proceedings, but that is apparently not going to happen, and we're going to see this case go back to the Court of International Trade and see what happens with the tariff refunds. All right, Jared, if you come on and take us through the global sit rep, please.
Yep, we're going to start off at our very own Secretary of State. Marco Rubio told the press yesterday that the U.S. knew there would be an Israeli attack on Iran over the weekend, which would result in Iran attacking American forces in the region. Rubio went on to say that the administration then preemptively attacked Iran with a pre-planned operation in order to cripple the Iranian military and prevent higher casualties from Iran being the first mover on American forces there. There's also a few updates regarding the Strait of Hormuz and energy there. A senior official from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps told Iranian state media that the IRGC and the regular army had closed the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Aramco and Qatar Energy each announced a halt to their operations after both suffered damage from Iranian attacks. Moving over to the Pacific, the U.S. secured 2 additional Pacific Island security agreements during Deputy Secretary of State Landau's tour of the region. The U.S. Coast Guard is going to help combat illegal fishing and other criminal activities around Tonga, so we're going to see a lot more movement over there. And the U.S. is going to provide $500,000, which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things for the U.S., but it's quite a bit for Fiji in order to assist combating transnational crime and illegal fishing. Now, the primary illegal fishing threat across the Pacific comes from China. This is about countering China's external dependencies. They are dependent on these fish for their entire food chain. This makes it materially more difficult for China to conduct military action on Taiwan in the near future. And lastly, last night, Ecuadorian President Noboa announced a new counter-narcotics and anti-illegal mining operation, quote, with our regional allies, including the United States. This comes immediately after the commander of Southern Command, Southcom, met with Noboa over the last couple of days in order to discuss ongoing cooperation against designated terrorist organizations and narco-terrorism in Latin America.
All right, well, let's go back to this energy crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. So in addition to this fight between Iranian officials over whether the strait's closed or not, and I think the U.S. Navy obviously disagreeing that it's closed, apparently there was an article published by Reuters talking about Lloyd's of London has been canceling war insurance for shipping through the strait. And I saw that John Conrad, he's the founder of G Captain, posted about it yesterday and thought he had an interesting take on this. So this does have the potential to be very disruptive to energy. It's not just the closures of energy production facilities, but the fact that you really can't move cargo without insurance. Like that, it's a major part of the supply chain. And canceling his take that I thought was very interesting is that canceling the insurance wasn't a matter of it being too risky. That's the point of insurance, but rather that it was a sign that Lloyd's had lost access to intelligence it uses to set insurance rates. And a lot of global insurance companies, they follow Lloyd's lead on pricing in insurance risks because Lloyd's has the best, as far as private insurance companies goes, the best access to intelligence in the world. And they happen to sit across the street from MI6. And MI6, UK's MI6 gets a lot of its intelligence, or MI5, with their intelligence apparatus. I think they've changed the name of it. They no longer call them MI5 or MI6. Basically gets a lot of its intelligence from the Five Eyes Alliance and primarily the US. And there has been, if I remember correctly, we were talking about this before the show, but if I remember correctly, Jared, the UK was basically blindsided by the US strikes in Iran. And his take was that this meant that there was no communication with the UK intelligence services over those future strikes. And I think if that is the situation, that lends some weight to this idea that the Trump administration does not necessarily trust the Five Eyes Alliance, or at least the UK portion of the Five Eyes Alliance.
Yeah, I do think that does point towards a bit of distrust there. We were talking also before the show about whether or not this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but whether or not the American forces were aware that they were going to do it on that day, with Secretary Rubio saying that this was in preparation for an Israeli attack. I think due to the movement of the Ford, the American forces likely knew that Israel was planning this in the very near future, maybe even the date. But I don't think that they were 100% certain it was going to happen until the night of, maybe the day before, just due to the fact that I really think they were going to try to de-escalate the entire region, particularly Israel, from attacking Iran.
Well, and you previously said this makes some of the developments around the negotiations ahead of the strikes make more sense. Like on Friday, there was talk of Iran officials. They were making concessions to the Trump administration. There were all the negotiators were going back to their capitals to go over what they had discussed about the U.S. Potentially taking control of some of the uranium and not weaponizing it. And in that, this seemed like there was a deal on the table ahead of strikes over the weekend.
Yeah, I can run through a few of the things that this helps explain. A lot of things that I was looking at going, why are we seeing what we're seeing here? The sudden reassignment of the Ford after numerous reassignments on a very long deployment, instead of awaiting the George H.W. Bush strike group's deployment, which they are still preparing for, by the way. And I expect them to go to the Middle East. That sudden reassignment showed, like I said at the time, something indicates they cannot wait an additional month and a half to 2 months in the Middle East. Something is pushing the United States to reassign this strike group out of the preferred theater into the theater that's supposed to be de-escalating. You covered the negotiations. There were all kinds of opposite signals coming out of there on Friday. This does help explain why the Ford also would have, at least the having to react to an Israeli attack, or the fallout of an Israeli attack, helps explain why the Ford, which was having some engineering issues, stopped in Cyprus instead of Haifa, Israel, despite the fact that Israel was saying we are expecting them to come to Haifa, Israel. The administration have paid pretty close attention to here. They have not called this a joint operation with Israel. For most of the announcements, I've noticed that they try to stay away from even acknowledging Israel's operation at the same time. They have mentioned it a few times, but not consistently saying this is with us. The admin also did not acknowledge Iranian strikes on Israel in the joint condemnation that was part of the entire region's joint condemnation that we covered yesterday, despite the fact that Iran is attacking Israel. This also accounts for Trump's announcement ignoring the concurrent Israeli op, and the admin went out of its way to say that Iran could attack close friends and allies in Europe, but not mention that it would cross over and permit Iran to attack Israel at that same time. This to me says that there was a lot of bad blood built up over the preparation of this operation.
Well, I mean, this wouldn't be the first time the Trump administration was not happy with Israel. There was the Israel strike on the Palestinian negotiators in Doha, if I remember correctly, or some other city in the Gulf. And Trump basically made Netanyahu call Qatar and apologize, or whatever, whichever Gulf country it was, apologize on the phone, on camera. Yeah, Qatar. And so this wouldn't be the first time there's been a break between the Netanyahu administration and the Trump administration. So I can't say what I think the political consequences could be, but it does seem to be another situation where the Trump administration appears to, just based on not necessarily what they've said explicitly, but based on actions. And like you said, like not mentioning Israel and the condemnation of strikes from Iran, that this is another point of political conflict between the Netanyahu and Trump administrations.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's move on to questions and answers. If you pull up we have some protests, 113 protests today, which Jared, is this above our baseline for a Tuesday?
Yeah, particularly for a Tuesday, this is well outside the norm, and this is largely in reaction to the strikes on Iran.
Yeah, there's been a lot of I've seen a lot of comments about, well, the anti-ICE organizers, anti-ICE activists disappeared, and suddenly the pro-Iran activists came out. No, these are likely, a lot of these Iran protests have already been happening, or these hands-off protests have already been happening. Not necessarily about Iran strikes, but and you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of intersectionality. That's a big thing for progressives, democratic socialists, the far left, activist class, of this intersection of topics. This is one of their biggest strengths with organizing, is that they get a group together people who are concerned about strikes on Iran, for example, or ICE operations. And once they get them organized and protesting and activating, they can direct these people to engage in other topics, other political topics. This was actually back during the pro-Palestine movement after the October 7, 2023 attack in Israel, when you saw this big surge of pro-Palestine groups. A lot of those protests were getting funding from pro-immigration groups, because a lot of the left in the United States, which is, it's not just the far left, that includes progressives, liberals, democratic socialists, they do have a major strength in organizing here, because they will build a crowd. If you want to read more about that, look up Elias Canetti, Crowds and Power. They'll build up these crowds, and they will direct them at one objective, and then when another objective pops up, the crowd for that objective and the crowd for the second objective, they combine their organizational power and organizational experience. So it wouldn't be surprising to me to go to one of these hands-off Iran protests, and if I had the Palantir AI facial recognition software and scan the faces of some of these protesters and find, well, hey, they're actually also conducting anti-ICE activities. All right, well, now let's move on to questions and answers. And if you could bring up our first question, Jared, from Frozen Nomad. Given Iran's already very fragile economic situation, how long could they realistically last without oil revenue before their economy collapses completely?
Frankly, I don't know. That depends on what kind of outside support they're getting as well.
All right. Next question, please. Additional to FN's question, is there an Iranian terminal port that has not been struck yet that would accelerate Iran's collapse, but also degrade its ability to stabilize post-conflict?
I don't know if anything has been left untouched. I can take a look into that today. But I think the biggest thing to come out of the stabilization efforts will be, or the biggest thing to affect stabilization efforts will be, does the Trump administration attempt to have any kind of diplomacy with any part of the government? We've talked about the bifurcation of their government there. I think that's going to be the more important parts for stabilization.
All right, next question, please. Also, from Dan in Texas. So you're blaming Israel for triggering a premature termination of negotiations and not Iran's delay tactics while accelerating missile nuclear warhead deployment.
So I want to clarify here. I did not say this. I am reading the statement from the Secretary of State. He said, we knew that there is going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them, Iran, before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties. That is the Secretary of State saying, we moved the timeline up. And there's additional information he put out. It is on the Secretary of State website. You will get it linked in the report, where he said that, let me pull up the quote here, but this operation needed to happen because Iran, in about a year or a year and a half, would cross the line of immunity, meaning they would have so many short-range missiles, so many drones that no one could do anything about it because they could hold the whole world hostage. That is Rubio saying, we had this operation pre-planned. We were preparing for an operation like this. We did not plan to do it now. And he does address, the question is not why, but why now. This is, frankly, yeah, it does look like the Secretary of State is saying Israel forced the hand of America.
Well, I think it's not even an either or situation. Iran, yes, Iran absolutely could have been using delaying tactics. That's part of the negotiation process.
Thank you. Let's focus on the first half. They were. Let's not kid ourselves. They were using delaying tactics. We saw that in the lead up to Midnight Hammer, and a lot of this was to actually give them time to do some more enrichment, to get some more missiles out. But that doesn't mean it had to happen immediately.
Yeah, the timeline that Rubio puts out, basically, if they waited another year, they would have had enough missiles and interceptors that we couldn't do anything about it. I think that's also a key point here, is that the Trump administration was looking at this strategically, and saying, basically we will reach a point where we can no longer do something. But that, the timeline on when doing something happened was based on other factors, but but it had weighed other factors like potentially Israel strikes. But that in the Trump administration's grand strategic picture, Iran was trying to get to a point where we could no longer say they can't have enriched uranium. And so like this is not just it. I think a lot of people really like for politics and geopolitics to be boiled down to like a very clean narrative about why something happens or what actors are doing. But in this case, it was likely both. The timeline could have been moved up because Israel was planning to strike Iran soon. And at the same time, Iran's delaying the, actually getting a deal or engaging in a deal in order to delay the United States from striking its nuclear program again, in order to get to that point of having a defense system that could, not, in their view, deter the United States. Because I think it's pretty clear by now that a lot of our foreign adversaries, they see the meta, so to speak, of fighting the United States as the U.S. being casualty averse, and their method of winning, one of their methods of winning, is to get media coverage about U.S. casualties. This goes back to Vietnam. And once they hit that point where they feel like they could deter, and Secretary Rubio apparently believes this based on his statement, that they could deter a U.S. response by having all of these drone and missile interceptors, that the winning condition would have been to inflict as many U.S. casualties in a future strike as necessary to get that negative media coverage and that negative political blowback domestically, because that is the meta for these middle and lower powers when the United States wants to impose its will upon them. And so it's not just a clean narrative of Israel said they're going to bomb Iran and enforce the Trump administration's hand. That is weighed in this, but Iran absolutely was delaying or engaging in delaying tactics, and that was likely part of this negotiation with the Trump administration. And there did seem to be a deal forming, and absolutely that could have been a delaying tactic on Iran's part. And the Trump administration eventually would have gotten to the point of saying, well, this is the point of we act now or never, because it's going to be too politically or materially costly in lives to do something about it in the future.
Dan did have a follow-up question about, hey, would we have kept this kind of flotilla there for a year and a half? No. I said that this did help explain why we saw the sudden surge of the forward carrier strike group instead of the George H.W. Bush, which is preparing to go to the Middle East anyway. That's generally where the East Coast carriers are headed, as they're going East Med or even potentially into the Persian Gulf. I think we were preparing for that, and the U.S. basically got wind, hey, we don't have time to wait on the Bush strike group. We have to take this strike group, the forward, that has already done an entire deployment's worth of time at sea, and get them over there now. I think that the Trump administration just moved whatever was available in order to prepare for this operation. I don't think we would have held this for a year and a half.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next question.
All right.
From Frozen Nomad, any thoughts on the recent reported success of Israel's Iron Beam system against Hezbollah missiles?
No, I know it was fairly effective against who was it? The Houthis during the 2023 Red Sea issue.
All right, William Lyerly, isn't a better look that Stormer and co. were cut out from Intel both because of leaks, but also the internal potential response toward the government?
I don't fully understand the question.
If you mean by leaks, yeah, I think the Trump administration is with that national security strategy, the Fortress North America strategy, and the criticisms of Europe. I think there is, based on that, I think there is some concern within the Trump administration about Five Eyes and the reliability of the UK and some of our European partners in the future. I would not be surprised if the Trump administration did hold back, basically not spread this to Five Eyes because of the concern of leaks and the potential situation in the UK, because that is something they called out in the national security strategy, was effectively the immigration policies in the UK have fundamentally changed the political culture and the government itself. All right. From Sarkar Darkstar, what economic impacts are we in the U.S. likely to see, and if any, what time frame will we see it? Well, the first is energy, oil, but I've seen a lot of signals coming out. A lot of reporting from energy traders and oil futures and energy futures, where right now there's kind of a calm, but there's concern that the longer that the conflict drags on, the more potential there is for disruption. And there is a back and forth on, some parts of the Iranian government are claiming they're closing the Strait of Hormuz, other parts are claiming they aren't. The U.S. Navy obviously disagrees that it's closed. But with this insurance situation, if that's not rectified, that's another potential disrupting factor for energy moving in and out of the Persian Gulf. Right now, there is, I think, a lot of anticipation of energy prices increasing, and because a lot of it's effectively based on vibes. They, for trading, they're concerned that the prices are going to increase in the future, so they're trading at higher prices for futures. The Trump administration, I think, is obviously concerned about it. That's why they're talking about this energy program, but they haven't said exactly what it's going to look like as far as trying to keep gas prices down. But that would be the first effect I would look for on the U.S. homeland, is going to be potentially increasing gas prices. As far as time frame, I think it becomes more likely to hit the longer the conflict lasts, especially because Iran is strategically positioned to be able to impact movement through the Strait of Hormuz. And I think this also explains why a lot of Gulf countries, on top of apparently Iran believing that striking other countries in the region would deter them from going onto the United States side, I think that this is also a concern for those countries, is the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, because many of them rely on the Gulf to move their exports out. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to keep the Strait of Hormuz open and get the shipping moving again, if it's not already moving now. All right, next question, please. From Ryan Owen, is there any indication that other countries are willing to join Iran in the conflict, North Korea being rumored?
No, not that I've seen. And the two that would make the biggest difference, Russia and China, neither one can necessarily afford to step in at this point. China, we just discussed yesterday, likely cannot even project power that far, not meaningfully. North Korea, the best they could do is send a few thousand troops, but they're already doing that in Ukraine, and that would require North Korean troops to potentially be attacked by American troops operating, just openly. That would be extremely detrimental to North Korea's security situation. And I've been keeping track on the Korean Peninsula pretty closely. It looks like the South Koreans are going to try to have a renewed peace deal with North Korea, similar to what we saw in 2019 under the first Trump administration.
All right, next question, please. From Jason Kohut, would having two carrier strike groups in the Middle East delay the retirement of the carrier?
So you're talking about the Nimitz here. They're the ones that are scheduled for retirement. And no, I don't think it would.
All right, next question, please. From Frozen Nomad, for the U.S. and allies in the region, what is the realistic better case scenario with Iran, and what kind of very rough probability would you assign to it happening?
Okay, so right off the bat, I'm going to let you know I don't have a probability for this. I just don't have a good enough read on it. But we were discussing yesterday after the show, I think the best possible, possibility for the U.S. and Iran that I can see so far, just based on public information, is potentially using Foreign Minister Araghchi, because he's been, anytime there's ever been any talk about not enriching uranium or getting rid of the enriched uranium, it's been attached to him. He's been helping there with the deal. He could also be the one actually leading the delay. Let's not kid ourselves there. But at the very least, that is there. He's operating in the secular side of the government. He supposedly has ties to the IRGC, so he could potentially mitigate that. If there is a quick path for peace, it may be through him. Honestly, though, that's going to be a call from the administration, not from us on the podcast.
Yeah, for me, I think the best for the Trump administration. So there's a comment here related to this from Roger Wood. I think it was basically, we were going to attack anyway. The timeline was moved up because of actionable intelligence. We shouldn't read too much into Rubio's statement. Well, I think we should read into Rubio's statement, obviously. Yeah. But I think the point here is, yeah, based on what he said, there was going to come a point where the U.S. would have to strike or never strike. And I don't think that has to do with like the United States doesn't have the material capability to do that, but the political cost of doing it. And yeah, I think that's the situation. And the best case scenario, but prior to the strikes, I think for the Trump administration was to get a deal from their foreign minister or whatever faction of the secular government he's part of within the secular government to get some of that enriched uranium out of Iran. Right now, I think the realistic best case scenario for the United States as far as winning conditions is to get a faction that has political power base and has, the actual capability to govern, to say, okay, we are willing to make a deal. Here's the uranium. And if they go back on it, or a faction emerges that is militantly against that, they kill them and they wait for the next faction to pop up. I think that's likely what the Trump administration is doing, because it just goes back to the Venezuela thing. There was a report, Spanish language report, that came out that Darcy Rodriguez, the vice president, during the Maduro raid, Delta Force guys rolled in to the government facilities and held a gun to her head and said, "Are you going to do what the Trump administration tells you to do? You have yes or no. You have 15 seconds to answer." She said yes. I think that it goes to what the strategic thing, what the thinking in the Trump administration is that we are, as part of this regime acquiescence idea, going to strike until somebody says, okay, we're willing to deal. And I think that's the best case scenario for the Trump administration, is that after killing off enough Iranian leadership, someone that has not been killed yet goes, hey, I'm willing to make a deal. As far as the probability, like you said, there's so much going on, and I'm not on the ground in Iran able to talk to Iranian leadership, all these different Iranian factions, to say who is willing to make a deal, that I can't say that there's what probability there is of this happening. But I think that is the best case scenario that the Trump administration is seeking, because Trump said, I think it was yesterday or over the weekend, that they were talking to a bunch of Iranian factions, basically, yeah, and leaders who were trying to figure out who they could make a deal with, a Maduro style deal that you can offer they can't refuse, and they were killed in the strikes. Well, now they have to find a new guy, and I think that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Next one's an easy one.
All right. The student of numbers are the most likely boots on the ground to restore or secure the Strait, or would that not be how it would be secured?
No, that's not how you secure it. You see all those blue dots on that map? You go open it up and kill everybody in the Navy. The Navy's been practicing reopening the Strait for 30 years, dealing with the Iranian boat swarms that would happen, and now drone swarms, but it's functionally pretty similar. I said yesterday, and I will say it again today, that Strait is not going to remain closed if it's closed at all.
All right. Next question, please, Jared. From Cordite Barbecue, Jared, do you think there's any credibility behind the rumors that Israel may have threatened the use of nukes in order to accelerate American interest in kinetic actions against Iran?
I had not heard nukes from Israel. I'm not sure that Israel would openly say that. Just they don't officially have them. They would require admitting a few things they should not admit. So no, I don't believe their credibility to that. If there is, then we're in for a whole new world.
All right, next question, please. From JSUP, did the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps sandbag and initially use outdated missiles and decoys to induce Israel and USA to expend interceptor stockpiles?
Man, that's a tough thing for me to buy. The Iranians have launched thousands of these things with very little success overall. Like, yeah, they've made a few key hits, but we talked about it yesterday. They're launching hundreds to get single-digit hits. You could argue they're sandbagging, but there's also a significant portion that just don't work. They've been reported as falling out of the sky, and the ministries of defense that are reporting this saying we didn't do it. They just failed. That to me doesn't look like it, when you take into combination where they are attacking, because they're attacking a ton of stuff that doesn't make much sense, like the Dubai International Airport, along with several other civilian airports. That to me looks like a desperate measure, not a calculated measure.
Yeah, I think if you're the IRGC commander and you are getting bombed, you have the threat of death, the imminent threat of death upon you. I don't think you would want to play clever games like this, like try to use outdated missiles to lure the United States into using up its THAAD or Patriot missile systems, because there's an F-15, an F-18, or an F-35 headed toward you right now, getting ready to drop a bomb on top of your head.
Right.
To me, the motivation here wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, every time you have a missile launched, there's a signal that goes out, and there is nobody in the world that has a better electronic warfare suite than the United States. They've been saying that publicly for years now. Like, yeah, nobody has it better. The moment that goes out, your decoy better have worked, and you better have the real one launching next, because they're coming to get you. That's just how it works. Yeah, I don't buy the decoy idea.
All right, next question, please. Preston M. There were 2 4.5 magnitude earthquakes in Iran, one before and one after the attack. Does Iran have a working nuke?
I don't know. Frankly, none of us could know that until they drop one.
Yeah, good point. All right, next question, please.
There is one other question. I think it's rhetorical.
Wait, you don't think Israel has a nuclear weapon? Official, I think that's the important.
No.
The important distinction here is officially. I think. I think we might have lost Jared. But so there's been a lot of back in the 80s, in 70s and 80s, there has been indicators that there were potentially Israeli and even Taiwanese involvement in the South African nuclear program. Now, Israel officially, South Africa dismantled its nuclear program prior to the end of apartheid, and Israel and Taiwan never got the nuclear capability officially. I couldn't tell you, without being able to Metal Gear Solid style sneak my way into Israeli facilities and get a look at them, to say whether they did or not, but officially, no.
Yeah. All right, now we are all caught up.
All right, well, if that is the end of our questions, then we'll be back with you in your inbox and on the show at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Have a good day, have a good rest of your day, and stay out front.